Hello, my name is Stephen Kinsella. I'm an economist at the Kemmy Business School in the University of Limerick. And what I want to talk to you about today, in terms of research, is why you should never ever think about anything other than policy making. I'm going to give you 3 examples and a definition in the next 15 minutes to try to convince you of this position. And hopefully at the end, you'll agree with me that the most important thing you can think about is policy making. So, first off, what's a policy? A policy is an instrument through which the values of our society are actually transmitted and allocated. So if you have a policy that everyone should earn the same amount of money, then that is the outcome that your policy will deliver or should deliver. If it doesn't deliver it, you can say the policy has been a failure. And if it does deliver it, you can say the policy has been a success. Often, policies actually intervene and tell us how we should interact with each other. For example, there are things like housing policies. Which kinds of house should be built? Which kinds of houses should not be built? Where should they be built? How much should they cost? Should the state own all the houses or something else? Industrial policy. Should some sectors be privileged above others? Should we decide to put all of the money of the state into high technology companies, for example, or just only domestic industries? These are different policy choices that we elect our politicians to make for us. And finally, which behaviours should be encouraged and which behaviours should be discouraged in terms of our own health, in terms of preventative health? Should we exercise more or less? Should we eat more or less? Should we eat this or that? Should we smoke or not smoke? And so forth. I'm going to show you 3 examples, 2 policy successes and 1 policy failure. And all of this is based on research that is cited at the bottom of all these slides. And we can discuss these different aspects of the policy process at the end of the discussion, if you like. So first off, when we think about policies, how our governments interact with societies, I'm going to give you 1 example. In 2002, Ireland was the first country to implement a blanket plastic bag levy of 15 cents per bag. Before the policy was introduced, 1.3 billion shopping bags were used, and that was 5% of all litter. The policy was introduced in 2002, as you can see there. The immediate impact of the policy was to move plastic bags from 5% of all litter to less than 0.2% of all litter. Once the policy was introduced, then the levy obviously raised a lot of money, 234 million, according to the Irish Government Economic Advisory and Evaluation Service. And the policy was a clear success in terms of its outcomes, but when plastic bag use started to increase again, the policy was changed. The price of the levy was increased from 15 cents to 22 cents per bag, and then the amount went down. So this is a clear policy success. The outcome was to reduce plastic bag litter and create a fund to spur environmental projects, and that's precisely what happened. Second policy success, if you like. In 2004, Ireland became the world's first country to implement a national workplace smoking ban. The results, according to a very interesting study by Stalling Smith et al. In 2013, were an immediate 13% decrease in all-cause mortality. So fewer people died as a result of this. A 26% reduction in heart disease, 32% reduction in stroke, 38% reduction in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Overall, the authors conclude that this policy alone saved 3,000 lives, and it impacted people who were over 65 far more than those who were under 65. So it really did achieve its outcomes, and it stands as a particular success in the history of health policy. Third example. Remember, the first 2 were successes. This one's going to be a failure. The regulation of banking. In 2007, Ireland was caught in a serious economic downturn as a result of inappropriate lending policies caused by the extension of credit by its banking system. The banks, private banks, were supposed to be regulated by the state. The policy of regulation existed to stop build-ups of unsustainable debt in the economy. And of course, the results of that were that we had the fourth most expensive bailout in financial history. The chart on the right shows the fiscal impact by crisis type. Ireland is there on the very top. It's over almost 40% of our gross national product, so gross domestic product, an enormous amount of money. On the right hand side, you can see or on the left hand side, sorry, you can see the liability growth. So the amount that was owed by households from 2000 to 2006. It's clearly on an unsustainable trajectory. The heat map in the middle of the chart shows you Ireland's increase relative to the rest of the Eurozone countries. And what you can see very clearly is countries like Germany, France, Belgium and Austria at the bottom there are kind of blue. The household increase isn't that big. Countries like the UK, Sweden and Portugal, they're not that bad. And Ireland is bright red. In other words, the increase is very, very, very high. So policy should have acted to make this much safer for people, and it would have forestalled a much larger crisis had the banks been regulated better at the time. So a clear example of a policy failure. So what makes some policies successful and others not? The first two examples I gave you are clearly successful policies because they're very clear and very achievable goals. The idea was to ban smoking and reduce the use of plastic bags. The second or the third policy that we talked about is far more diffuse, far more complex, far more amorphous. It's a very, very different thing. Okay, so banking regulation doesn't necessarily have clear or even achievable goals. In deciding to implement a policy, very often more information is better, but not always, as my own research has shown. The truth about it is there's always uncertainty around any policy. You don't know how it's going to be implemented. You don't know if a brilliant idea is just going to be implemented badly, or if a bad idea is going to be implemented brilliantly and just succeed despite the intentions of the policymakers. What is true, and this has come from the work of Tubman and many others, is that bad policies often come from some combination of tyranny, hubris, incompetence, or folly, and they are always packaged in the triptych of ideas, interests, and institutions. Bad ideas, bad institutions, misaligned interests will give you bad policies. So a good way to think about making policies better is to understand the interaction of ideas, interests, and institutions. And when you do that, things are going to be better. Remember, the goal of good policy is to make society better for everyone. And that's why you should never think about anything other than policy. Thank you very much for your attention.